My name is Claire Ellison, and I watched them lower an empty casket into the ground, knowing I would one day make my mother confess on the witness stand as I handed over the forged death certificate she signed. That's right. I exposed her and her lover in federal court. Where are you watching from? Write it in the comments. I want to know who's with me in this. Asheville, North Carolina. The rain had held off long enough for the funeral to begin, but now the clouds were splitting open like a wound, hurling cold droplets onto the polished black umbrellas that filled the cemetery. I stood still at the edge of my father's grave, numb fingers clutching a bouquet I could no longer bring myself to release. I hated this suit. It was the same charcoal gray one I'd worn when I defended my thesis, and now it was clinging to my spine in wet patches, as if it, too, resented being repurposed for grief. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, the only thing grounding me in this surreal blur of whispered condolences and cheap roses. I walked toward the parking lot, away from the murmured prayers and artificial sorrow. I hit Mom. It rang twice before she answered. "Claire, darling," she cooed, over the hum of what sounded like ocean waves. "Is this really necessary?" I froze. The background was unmistakable seagulls, clinking glasses, a distant saxophone playing something that didn't belong anywhere near morning. "Where are you?" I asked slowly, already knowing the answer. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Cancun, thought I deserved a little escape after everything." I blinked, the wind slicing across my cheek. "After everything." She sighed like I was being dramatic. "I needed space, Claire, and honestly, your father wouldn't want me sulking in some dreary funeral home." I clenched the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "He died 4 days ago," she laughed. "And what would you like me to do? Sit in a rocking chair wearing black lace for the rest of my life?" "No," I said, my voice cracking. "But maybe not run off to Mexico with a man who wasn't your husband while we're still burying the one who was." There was a silence on the line, brief, measured. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, voice dripping in insincere warmth. "Life moves on, you should too." And just like that, she hung up. The cemetery around me swam out of focus. Somewhere behind me, a priest droned on about ashes and dust. My father's name echoed off the cold stone. I had tried to hold myself together all morning. Tried to make sense of a man who'd seemingly died of a sudden heart attack, whose affairs were oddly neat, and whose death certificate had raised more questions than answers. But now, with my mother sipping cocktails in Cancun and calling it self-care, something inside me snapped. I walked back toward the grave. The casket, closed and pristine, was being lowered. I noticed it for the first time, how light it had looked, how quickly they'd sealed it. My Aunt Ellen touched my arm. "You okay?" No, I wasn't. I shook her off gently. They said the dead don't speak. But I swear in that moment I could hear my father whisper. Something was off, and I was going to find out what. The storm broke fully above us just as the last shovel of dirt hit the coffin lid. I didn't cry. I stood there, soaked and staring, my mind spinning faster than the wind around me. What mother skips her husband's funeral for a beachside affair? Only one who has something to hide, and I would find it. No matter what. I didn't unpack. My suitcase sat like a dead weight in the corner of my apartment, half-zipped and damp with the scent of Asheville rain. The silence felt like a living thing, hovering between the walls and pressing against my skin. The only sound was the occasional clink of ice in the untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table. I had poured it with good intentions. Ritual, closure, whatever people tell themselves in grief. But I couldn't drink it. It felt wrong. Like toasting a lie. I curled up on the couch instead, my legs tucked under me, wrapped in my dad's old college sweatshirt. I'd found it buried in a box in the attic 2 years ago, Duke University, class of '78. He'd told me to keep it. It's a little ugly, but it's seen me through enough that it might be lucky. It wasn't lucky. Not anymore. I opened my photo app. Scrolling gave me something to do, something familiar. There were photos of us fishing when I was little, my gap-toothed grin holding up a soggy boot instead of a trout. There was one from last Thanksgiving, his arm around my shoulders while Mom smiled tightly beside him, already distant. I paused on that one. Her hand wasn't on him. Just floated beside his arm like she couldn't bear to touch him anymore. I almost missed the notification when it popped up. New message from Dad. The room tilted. I didn't move for a full 10 seconds. My thumb hovered above the screen as if touching it would electrocute me. My chest tightened with something sharp and cold. My father had been dead 4 days. His phone, along with his wallet, was supposedly sealed in a box the funeral director returned to me after the cremation paperwork was signed. But the message was real. Green bubble, typing timestamp. Help me, go to the cemetery, quickly. I stared at the screen until the letters began to blur. Then I whispered, no, 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 no. This can't be real. My voice cracked in the middle, a thin shaking sound that didn't sound like me at all. I grabbed the phone in both hands, backed out of the message, checked the contact. It was his number, the one I hadn't yet deleted, the one I still couldn't bring myself to rename or remove from my favorites list. This has to be a prank. A cruel, horrible prank. I rushed to check my call logs, my settings, the phone account I'd shut down myself the day after the funeral. But there it was, active. The message blinked at me again. Go to the cemetery, now. I stood frozen for a beat, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. Then slowly my body started moving without full permission from my brain. I grabbed my coat. Outside, the street was quiet in the kind of way that makes you question whether you're still part of the world. My breath curled in the cold as I locked the door behind me, keys shaking in my hand. The drive was a blur. I took corners too fast. Ran a red light. My father's name pulsed behind my eyes, the way it had looked etched into the tombstone earlier that day. Samuel Everett Ellison, 1956-2026. A lie carved in stone. As I reached the final stretch leading to the cemetery gates, a rational voice tried to claw its way into my mind. You're being manipulated. Someone stole his phone. Someone's sick. But that voice didn't stop my foot from pressing harder on the gas. It was 1:12 a.m. when I pulled up to the black wrought iron fence surrounding Silver Pine Cemetery. The security lights at the entrance buzzed overhead, casting the gate in a pale yellow glow. I parked just outside the gate and slipped through the side opening. No guard in sight. No living soul at all. As I stepped into the cemetery proper, the cold wrapped itself tighter around me. Fog hugged the gravestones, low and shimmering like it had risen just for me. My boots crunched over gravel, each step sounding wrong, too loud in a place made for silence. Then my phone buzzed again. New message from Dad, look for the rose. My throat tightened. The rose, my father's grave had one etched into the corner of the stone. I remembered thinking it didn't suit him, that delicate carving. It had been my mother's choice. She'd said something flippant about rebirth and beauty. I'd barely been able to nod. I picked up the pace, half walking, half jogging past unfamiliar headstones. Every shape in the fog felt like it might shift or rise. I hated myself for thinking it, but I kept going. I didn't stop until I reached the grave. His grave. And there it was. Nestled in the base of the tombstone behind the flower vase, something white, sealed in plastic like a Ziploc bag. Inside, an envelope. I looked around wildly. No one, just fog and shadow and the rustle of wind through brittle leaves. I picked it up, heart in my throat. Across the front, in my father's neat, unmistakable handwriting, CLAR, do not ignore this, and under that a GPS coordinate. I didn't hear the branch crack behind me until I'd already stuffed the envelope into my coat. I whipped around. Who's there? I shouted into the dark. No answer, just the hiss of wind and the eerie stillness of the graves. Hello? I called again, louder, silence, then crack. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. Full speed, heart thundering, breath burning. I didn't look back until I was in my car with the doors locked. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table in my coat, trembling fingers tracing the sharp crease in the envelope. The sun had started to rise, casting a sickly pale light across the counters, but the cold inside me hadn't thawed one bit. My father's handwriting was still vivid against the paper. CLAR, do not ignore this. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. Just a command. An urgency. The GPS coordinates were scrawled on a separate slip of paper folded inside, along with a single line. Come alone, trust no one. I'd read those words at least 50 times by now. The paper had gone soft at the corners from where I kept smoothing it down like it would give me more if I stared hard enough. My heart said go. My head begged me to pause. So I sat there, replaying every step from the night before. The way the fog had thickened the moment I stepped through the cemetery gate, as if it had been waiting for me. The faintest rustle near the trees. That branch, that crack, I hadn't imagined it. Whoever or whatever had been watching me, they didn't want me to stay. Or maybe they were waiting to see what I would do. I stared at the GPS coordinates again. Pulled up my phone. The spot was about 40 minutes west, out near Pisgah National Forest, miles of wooded trails, and barely any cell reception. What was out there? And more importantly, who? By noon, the fog had lifted, but the chill hadn't. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I didn't have anyone to tell, really. My closest friend, Brianna, lived in New York now. My mother, Cancun, my father, dead or not, I didn't know anymore. The drive took me through winding back roads that twisted higher into the mountains. Pines pressed in on both sides of the road, thick and dark, like they were leaning in to listen. As I turned onto the gravel path marked only by a rusted metal post, a strange calm settled over me. I should have been scared, I was scared. But beneath that, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day of the funeral: purpose. The trail was barely visible. Just two tire ruts through a mess of fallen leaves and pine needles. I parked when the trees became too dense to continue, grabbed my flashlight, and stuffed the envelope in my pocket. The wind had picked up, carrying the sound of distant branches creaking like old bones shifting in their graves. I followed the GPS, weaving between trees, watching my footing as moss slicked the stones beneath my boots. After 20 minutes I found it, a clearing. And in the middle of it, standing like a ghost out of time, was a small, weather-worn cabin. It looked abandoned, roof sagging, paint peeled to bare wood, the porch slightly tilted. But the door was ajar, and a thin column of smoke curled from the chimney. I stepped forward, heart racing. That's when I heard it. A floorboard inside creaked. I froze, one hand hovering near my pocket, fingers curling around the edge of my phone even though I knew there was no signal out here. Then his voice, low, hoarse, shaky. "Claire," I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Dad," it came out as a whisper, then louder. "Dad," the door creaked open wider. And there he was, Samuel Ellison, my father. Not in a suit or a coffin, not in a photo, not in a memory, standing, alive. He looked like hell, eyes sunken, beard unshaved, thinner than I remembered, but it was him, it was him. I took a step forward, legs trembling. He raised both hands as if afraid I might vanish. "It's okay, it's really me." And then I dropped to my knees. The world blurred around the edges, sounds dulling to static. I couldn't feel the cold anymore. Couldn't hear the wind or the leaves or the frantic stutter of my heart. I just stared. "I don't understand," I whispered. His eyes filled with something like pain or maybe relief. "They were going to destroy me, Claire," he said softly. "And I had no choice." The last time I saw my father alive, he was giving a toast at my birthday dinner. That was 6 months ago at a steakhouse downtown. He'd worn a navy blazer and told the waiter it was his daughter's big day, his voice full of pride and that signature teasing glint in his eyes. Now he stood in front of me in wrinkled flannel, cheeks sunken, eyes darting to the trees like he expected to be hunted. And all I could manage was, "You're supposed to be dead." His voice cracked when he said my name again. "Claire," I stood slowly, my legs still shook. "What the hell is going on?" He took a step toward me, tentative like he wasn't sure I'd let him. "It's not safe out here, come inside, I'll explain everything, just not where anyone can see." Anyone who was watching. Still half stunned, I let him guide me up the rickety steps and into the cabin. He closed the door gently behind us and pulled the heavy curtain over the single, dust-coated window. Inside, the space was dim, cramped, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and mildew. A small cast-iron stove crackled in the corner. There was one narrow bed, a folding table, and stacks of canned food lining the shelves like a doomsday bunker. A single lantern lit the room, casting a yellowish glow across his face. I studied him, my father. His once neatly trimmed hair had grown longer and the lines in his face had deepened, but his eyes, the way they searched mine, those were the same. "Before I say anything else," he said, voice low, "you need to understand, I didn't fake my death to run away from you, I did it to survive." I sat slowly on the wooden chair beside the table. "Start from the beginning." He rubbed his face, exhaling hard. I started noticing strange charges in the company's accounts last summer. Offshore transfers, wire redirections. At first I thought it was embezzlement, but then I saw your mother's name. I blinked. "What?" She was siphoning funds through dummy LLCs. Then her name disappeared, replaced by someone else, Michael Landry. That name sent an ice pick down my spine. Michael was her soulmate, the man she'd apparently flown to Cancun with during my father's funeral. I'd only met him once. A slick real estate developer who kissed her hand like he was in a bad movie and called me kiddo. Dad shook his head. "She didn't just cheat on me, Claire, she betrayed everything, my company, our home, she was setting me up." I opened my mouth, then closed it. My lungs felt tight, like I'd forgotten how to breathe. She forged my signature on estate documents, started moving assets out of our name. When I confronted her, she smiled. Said I was old, tired, and irrelevant, and that she and Michael would take care of everything now. He paced the small room, hands moving restlessly. I thought I could fight her. I hired a lawyer, but within 2 weeks the same lawyer backed out, said he didn't want trouble. Then my bank accounts froze. The business was seized for tax investigation. He looked at me then, something shivering behind his eyes. The only person I thought I could still trust was you, but I couldn't risk contacting you. Not yet. I could barely process it. My mother, a charming, brittle woman who hosted charity luncheons and drank her wine with a straw to protect her veneers, was capable of this. She declared me dead, he said bitterly. Submitted paperwork with forged medical records, bought off a coroner. She wanted the life insurance, the estate, everything. But the funeral, your body, he gave a humorless laugh. That casket was filled with sandbags, paid for by me, I might add. I needed them to believe it, for a while anyway. I felt like the room was spinning. She said you had a heart attack, I whispered. I almost did, when I realized she was serious. Michael's not just her boyfriend, he has a history, fraud, racketeering, 2 aliases I know of. She's in deep with him now. My voice shook. So why contact me now? Because you're the only one who might be able to help me get the final evidence, he said. There's a safe, in the house, behind the bookcase in my study. Only you and I know the code. I leaned back, my heart pounding. You want me to go back there? You have access, she won't suspect you, and you'll know if anything's been moved. I swallowed hard. The idea of walking into that house, her house now, made my skin crawl. What's inside? He looked me dead in the eye. Everything, the real estate transfers, her emails, the death certificate she forged, enough to put both of them away. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Why me? He sat across from me, voice cracking. Because you're the only person I trust, and I'm tired of hiding. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just the crackle of the stove and the distant cry of a bird outside. I'm not sure I can do this, I whispered. You can, he said, his voice firmer now. You've always been braver than you think. I stood slowly, the weight of what he was asking settling into my bones. Then I guess I'm going home. Cabin had no electricity, but my father lit a stub of a candle and set it in a chipped ceramic holder on the table. The flame flickered wildly, casting warped shadows on the log walls, making everything feel more surreal. I was still sitting on a folding chair, my arms folded tight against my chest like they could hold in all the disbelief. He opened a dented tin box from under the cot. Inside were plastic sleeves filled with papers, some folded, some smudged with soot or damp at the edges. He placed them on the table carefully, one by one, like evidence in a trial. These, he said, are the pieces they didn't destroy. The first sheet was a scanned copy of his will, an earlier version, dated before he and my mother separated finances. His signature was clean. Beside it, he placed another version of the same document, dated months later, with his name scrawled in a way I instantly recognized as wrong. That's not yours, I said, leaning forward. It doesn't even look close. Exactly, and yet this is the one your mother submitted to the estate attorney, with a death certificate dated a week before I died. I blinked. But you only collapsed that Tuesday. You called me about your cardiologist appointment that morning. He nodded grimly. Which means they had the documents ready before I was even dead, because they never planned on waiting. I covered my mouth with one hand. She forged your death before you were gone. And started filing life insurance claims 2 days after. He pulled out a thick envelope and spilled its contents on the table. Photographs of property deeds, financial transfers, wire logs, one after another. She transferred the deed to our Asheville home into a holding company registered to a Florida address, he said. That's Michael's name buried under the layers. I traced it. He's done this before. She always said he was just helping her reorganize. I whispered, the memories bubbling up, how casually she'd explained selling the lake house, how she'd brushed off any mention of my father's accounts. He looked at me with tired, red-rimmed eyes. They thought I was a fool, Claire, old, soft, easy to erase. I stared at the papers. A version of my mother, Diane Simmons, was slowly taking shape. Cold, strategic. This wasn't an impulsive affair. It was a plan, years in the making. She even submitted a death certificate to the state, he muttered, thumbing through the folder until he pulled out a scan of a North Carolina vital record form. Signed by a man named Dr. Kyle Denner. He doesn't exist. I shook my head, overwhelmed. This is criminal. It's beyond criminal, he said, his voice quiet now. It's orchestrated, and it only works if I stay dead. I looked up at him, the question forming in my throat before I could stop it. Why didn't you go to the police? His mouth twisted bitterly. I did, twice, once under my name, once anonymously, but Michael has friends, people who make things disappear. The detective I spoke with retired suddenly a week later. I knew I needed to disappear if I wanted the truth to survive. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. But now they think I'm truly gone, relaxed, that's our chance. Our? I asked. He gave me a look. You're the only one who can walk into that house without suspicion. I let out a shaky breath and glanced down at the documents again. The forged will, the fake death certificate, the web of transfers that moved his entire life into Michael's hands. All I could whisper was, how could she do this? The flame guttered as if it, too, didn't want to know. The fire in the little stove had dwindled to glowing embers by the time my father spoke again. He'd been staring into the darkness for a while, the collar of his flannel shirt pulled tight around his neck. I could tell he was weighing something heavy. Then he said, very quietly, there's one more thing I need you to do. I looked up from the table where I'd been rearranging the papers, still trying to make sense of the tangled horror in front of me. What is it? He stood and walked slowly to the cot, reaching behind the threadbare mattress. From there, he pulled out an old, cracked leather notebook. It looked like the kind you'd find in a thrift store, worn smooth with time, its spine barely hanging on. But inside, he revealed a hand-drawn floor plan. Our house, I murmured, recognizing it instantly. He nodded, laying the sketch out flat on the table beside the documents. His finger tapped a small rectangle just off the study. There's a safe. Behind the third bookcase, the one on the right wall, you remember? Yes, I said slowly. It always looked shorter than the others. That's because it is. It's built into the wall. I designed it that way back when I still trusted your mother. His jaw tightened and he looked away for a moment, then he continued. The safe has everything I couldn't carry with me. Originals, not copies, deeds, letters, emails she printed and stashed because she didn't think I knew. I stared at the plan, the route through the house replaying in my head like muscle memory. The study, the hallway, the bookcase. What's the code? I asked. He smiled faintly. Your birthday and mine back to back. 7,231,956.101. Good girl, he said quietly. You were always the one paying attention. I blinked hard, the warmth in his words cutting through the cold of betrayal that had settled deep in my chest. But if the documents are so damning, I asked, why not go get them yourself? I tried once. Late at night, back in November. I thought the house was empty. But Michael came home early and almost caught me. He swallowed. They'd have me buried for real if they saw me again. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His fingers were cold, calloused, and trembling slightly. You can do this, he said. They won't suspect you, not if you keep it casual. Go in the afternoon, say you want a few keepsakes, pictures, something of mine, she'll believe that. 1,000 objections flooded my mind. What if Michael was home? What if she followed me? What if I didn't make it out in time? And still I nodded, because the truth wasn't just lying in a cabin in the woods anymore. It was sitting behind a wall in the house where I grew up, behind a bookcase that had once held bedtime stories and school photos. Now it held secrets. All right, I said, I'll go tomorrow. He exhaled a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. Claire, I looked at him. If anything happens to me before you come back, he said, don't stop. Not even if it gets ugly, especially if it gets ugly. I didn't answer. I just squeezed his hand. Then I stood, folded the sketch carefully and tucked it into my coat. Tomorrow I would walk into my mother's house with a smile and I would steal the truth. By noon the next day I was back in Raleigh. The house looked the same from the outside, clean brick, pristine shrubs, wind chimes clinking gently over the porch, but something about it now felt colder, smaller. A mask with too much makeup. I stood at the door for a few seconds before knocking. I couldn't bring myself to use the key. It opened before the second knock landed. My mother, Diane Simmons, stood in white linen, holding a crystal wine glass filled with something peach-colored. She looked vaguely amused to see me. Well, she said, voice light. This is unexpected. I forced a smile. I wanted to pick up a few of Dad's things. Just some old photos, maybe his watch, something to remember him by. Her lips twitched, like she was about to comment on my sentimentality. But she only stepped aside and said, of course, take what you want. The study's a mess though, I've been meaning to clean it out. She sipped her drink as I walked past her, my steps unnaturally calm, like I wasn't preparing to rob her blind. The house smelled like lemon polish and gardenia, the scent she'd always used when she wanted to reset the energy. She used it when I got dumped in college. When Grandma died. When Dad first moved out. This wasn't mourning, this was control. As I passed the hallway mirror, I glanced at my own reflection. Pale, too quiet, too measured, not a grieving daughter, not exactly. Michael's voice floated in from the back patio. "Babe, bring out another glass." "I have company," she called back, then lowered her voice to me. "He's on a conference call, real estate stuff, you know." I nodded as if I did, as if I cared. "Would you like a drink?" "No, thank you," I said politely. I'll be quick." "Take your time," she said sweetly. "I'll be on the deck if you need anything." She drifted away, humming, the way someone hums when their world is perfectly in place. I didn't watch her go. I moved straight to the study. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the smile dropped from my face. My hands began to sweat. Everything was exactly as I remembered: the old oak desk, the brass reading lamp, the 3 tall bookcases flanking the far wall. The middle one, the third, was just slightly shorter than the others. Built in but not flush. I walked over slowly, heart pounding now, and tugged at the shelf. It didn't budge, of course not. He designed it that way. I knelt down and pressed the bottom left corner hard. Click. The case shifted just an inch. Then I pressed my palm against the back panel and pushed it to the left. It slid, revealing a small steel door flush with the wall. No bigger than a hotel safe. I pulled the notepad from my coat pocket, reading the code one last time. 7,230,1956.101. Dad's birthday and mine. I typed it in. The lock beeped once, then clicked open. Inside were 2 large manila folders, a USB drive taped to a note card that read "copy of everything," and a black leather-bound notebook. I didn't open anything. Not yet. I just slipped all of it into the lining of my tote bag, prepped earlier with a second zipper for exactly this. From the bookshelves, I grabbed an old family photo album and a framed picture of my father fishing at Emerald Lake, just to make it look like I'd actually come for sentimental things. As I closed the safe and slid the shelf back into place, I heard the patio door open. "Claire," my mother called lightly. "Everything all right in there?" I pasted the smile back onto my face before I opened the door. "Just finishing up." She smiled and raised her glass. "Good girl, maybe this'll help you finally let go." I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, maybe." I left without hugging her, and I didn't look back. I had just zipped the tote shut when the floor creaked behind me. My blood ran cold. The study door hadn't made a sound, but someone was standing there. I knew it before I turned. "Lose something," came Michael's voice, low and sharp. I spun around, trying not to flinch. He stood in the doorway in a crisp polo shirt and loafers, holding a sweating glass of bourbon like he was walking into a casual conversation, not an ambush. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't hear you come in," I said, trying to keep my tone breezy. "I live here," he replied with a chuckle. "Or had you forgotten?" My grip tightened on the handles of the tote, heart pounding behind my ribs like a warning drum. "Just grabbing some pictures of my dad," I said, holding up the fishing photo I'd taken from the shelf. "Mom said I could take whatever I wanted." He leaned against the doorframe, studying me. "Funny, you've never really struck me as sentimental." I forced a smile. "You'd be surprised what you miss after a funeral." He stepped further into the room, slow and casual, but his eyes flicked once toward the bookcase behind me. My throat tightened. "Don't look back. Don't look guilty." "Mind if I see what you picked out?" he asked, already closing the distance. I shifted the bag on my shoulder. "It's just a few old things, a couple of photo albums, that sketchbook Dad used to doodle in when I was a kid." Michael laughed softly, still too friendly. "Wow, Claire Ellison, nostalgic for childhood, that's almost sweet." His eyes bored into mine. The moment stretched thin and sharp like wire. Then he glanced around the room, not bothering to hide the suspicion anymore. "You were in here a while," he said. "What else were you looking for?" I tilted my head. "Michael, is there a problem?" He took a slow sip of his bourbon, watching me over the rim. "Not at all, just odd that you chose the study. You hated this room, remember? Said it smelled like cigar ash and ego." I laughed. "It came out brittle." "Maybe I've changed." Michael nodded slowly, taking another step toward the bookcase. "Right, we all change." He was too close now. If he leaned forward and touched the shelves, he'd notice the shift. The hidden latch, The half-millimeter misalignment I'd barely managed to cover. I needed to get out. Well, I should let you get back to your call, I said lightly, moving past him toward the door. Tell Mom thanks for the drink offer. But Michael turned too, walking with me down the hallway. Sure, I'll let her know. He didn't ask to see inside the bag. He didn't accuse me outright. But something in the way he kept pace with me, silent, alert, told me he suspected exactly what I'd done. At the door, I forced one more casual smile. I'll text her a picture of the stuff I took, just so there's no confusion. Good idea, he said, still watching me too closely. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings. I nodded, stepped outside, and kept my shoulders relaxed until the door shut behind me. Only once I was in my car, doors locked, engine running, did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The curtain in the study twitched. Michael was watching. I drove straight home, never stopping, barely breathing. My fingers were white around the steering wheel, and every glance in the mirror made my pulse spike. But no one followed me, not that I could be sure. Paranoia isn't rational. It feeds on silence. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had dipped low, casting the buildings in tired amber light. Everything felt normal in the worst way. Inside, I double-locked the door, slid the chain, and pulled all the blinds shut before I even took off my coat. Then I emptied the tote onto the kitchen table. The USB drive, 2 manila folders, the notebook with the leather cover worn soft at the corners. I stared at them like they were explosives. After a moment, I plugged the USB into my laptop with shaking hands. It loaded slowly, almost nervously. Inside were PDFs, scanned letters, bank records, insurance forms, the forged will, dozens of emails with subject lines like RE, asset transfer, and final copy certificate. I didn't open every file. I didn't need to. The volume alone told me enough. This was real. This was evidence. I snapped photos with my phone, close-ups of the key documents, just like my dad asked. The forged death certificate, the altered will, a grainy screenshot of my mother's signature next to the false witness name. All time-stamped, all incriminating. Then I opened our last text thread and began sending them one by one. Me, got them, sending now, will keep the originals in my safe. Me 10 mins later, are you okay? I waited, the silence in the apartment stretching like elastic. Then finally a reply. Dad, good job, destroy the originals, that was it, no thank you, no I'm proud of you. Not even a thumbs up emoji, just, destroy the originals. I stared at the message, confused. Why I thought this evidence was everything. Why destroy the only physical proof we had? I typed back quickly. Me, you sure thought we needed them, no response. I called, straight to voicemail, I called again. Same thing, an hour passed. Then 2. The tension I'd been holding all day started to twist into something colder. He'd been scared, yes, but he was also careful. He always followed up. Always, something was wrong, I didn't want to overreact. Not after what we just pulled off. But as I paced the living room, chewing my thumbnail, the silence began to feel strategic. Dad, please text me. Just say you're safe, still nothing. I opened the notebook. It was filled with his handwriting, some pages neat, others messy, almost frantic. Notes, names, timelines. A few addresses circled in red ink. Michael's alias, a bank account offshore. And then one scribbled sentence on the inside back cover, if you're reading this, I may already be gone. My heart dropped. Gone how, gone where? No matter how many times I checked my phone, no new message came. No buzz, no call. The walls of my apartment started to feel like they were closing in. I whispered it aloud, barely recognizing my own voice. Dad, where did you go? 3 days passed with no word from my father. On the 4th morning, someone knocked on my door. Not a polite knock, not a neighborly tap, a hard, authoritative pounding that vibrated through the wood. I froze mid-step in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Claire Ellison, a male voice called out. Raleigh Police Department, please open the door. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might actually faint. I opened it slowly. 2 officers stood there. One older, unreadable. One younger, avoiding my eyes. Ms. Ellison, the older one began, we have a warrant for your arrest. I blinked. For what? Breaking and entering, theft of private documents. My ears rang. That's not possible. Ma'am, he said, already reaching for the cuffs, you are under arrest. Cold metal snapped around my wrists. The hallway felt too bright, too exposed. A neighbor's door cracked open as they walked me out. I didn't steal anything, I said, voice shaking. That was my father's study. My father's house. The house is legally owned by Diane Simmons, the officer replied flatly. And she's filed a report stating you illegally accessed a locked storage unit and removed sensitive property. My mother, of course. The station smelled like stale air and disinfectant. I sat on a metal bench, hands cuffed in front of me now, my heart hammering. Then I saw her. Diane Simmons, perfect hair, cream blouse, eyes red but not from crying, from effort. She spotted me and immediately dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. I can't believe my own daughter would do this, she told the officer beside her. After everything I've done for her. I stood up so fast the bench scraped loudly across the floor. She forged Dad's death certificate, I shouted. She stole everything from him, my mother gasped softly like I'd slapped her. You see, she whispered to the officer. She hasn't been coping well since her father passed. She's been unstable, unstable. I lunged forward instinctively, but the officer grabbed my arm. That's enough. She's lying, I yelled. Check the documents, check the signatures. They were planted, my mother said softly, eyes shimmering with false sorrow. Claire broke into my study, I caught her. Michael has it all on camera, my blood turned to ice. Michael had been watching. I was processed within the hour, fingerprints, mugshot, the flash blinded me. I stared into the camera lens and thought, this is what she wanted. To make me look hysterical, desperate, guilty. When they put me in the holding cell, the walls felt like they were breathing. Dad had warned me if it gets ugly. I slid down against the concrete wall, pulling my knees to my chest. He told me to destroy the originals. I didn't, they were still in my apartment safe. Had she already sent someone there? Had this all been a trap? The metal door buzzed open. Claire Ellison, a guard called. You've been assigned a court date. Bail hearings tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, this was real. I stood slowly, legs weak. As they led me back down the hallway, I caught one last glimpse of my mother through the glass partition. She was speaking softly to Michael now, and he was smiling. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and stale nerves. I sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed blazer that was too tight in the shoulders, wrists crossed in my lap, trying to remember how to breathe. The courtroom clerk called my name. Claire Ellison, charged with breaking and entering, theft of private property, and unlawful possession of confidential financial records. How do you plead? I opened my mouth, but my voice wouldn't come out. My lawyer leaned in. Claire, not guilty, I whispered, then louder. Not guilty. The prosecutor stood with her folders and her fireproof voice, painting me as an unstable daughter, acting out in grief, delusional from the trauma of losing a parent. She called my actions erratic, my motives unclear, and my story inconsistent with the facts presented by Diane Simmons and Mr. Michael Landry. They made me sound like a villain in my own life. The judge, a woman with slate-gray hair and unreadable eyes, scribbled notes as the courtroom murmured. Then it was my turn. I took the stand with knees shaking, the truth heavy in my throat. My father isn't dead, I said. They tried to erase him. They forged documents, they moved assets, they tried to bury him in paperwork instead of dirt. I only did what I did to stop them. My mother sat at the front, dabbing her eyes like the star of a tragic play. Michael didn't flinch. He just stared at me like he already knew how this would end. When the closing statements began, I felt the weight of every eye in that room pressing down on me. The judge adjusted her glasses, readying to speak, and then the doors slammed open. The entire courtroom jolted. I turned, heart in my throat. Two men in dark suits strode in, badges flashing gold under the fluorescent lights. Diane Simmons, one of them said loudly, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and insurance-related criminal activity." Gasps rippled across the room. Someone dropped their pen. A bailiff moved, stunned, but not fast enough to stop the agents from cuffing my mother on the spot. "What is this?" she cried, wrenching her arm. "I'm the victim." But then a third figure stepped through the door. My father, alive, whole, eyes filled with tears as he looked straight at me. "I'm sorry I was late," he said, voice shaking. I stood. My hands covered my mouth as the realization hit. He came back. He came back. I stumbled down from the stand, across the floor, and into his arms like I was 8 years old again, falling into the only place that ever felt like home. "You came back," I sobbed. "I had to," he whispered. "You saved my life, Claire." My mother screamed behind us, twisting in her seat as the agents led her out. "This isn't over," she yelled. "She forged everything, they're lying," but no one listened. The judge slammed her gavel twice. "Order, order." But nothing about the moment was orderly. Justice didn't arrive in neat packages. It came in crashing doors, stunned gasps, and long overdue reunions. A month later, we sat on the back porch of a rented cabin nestled on the edge of Blue Ridge. Not the same one he'd hidden in, not the one soaked in paranoia and fear. This one had wide planks, white rockers, and a view that let you forget, for just a little while, that the world could be cruel. We didn't talk much. Not at first. We just sipped our coffee in matching chipped mugs and watched the trees sway like they were breathing. Dad looked older, but more alive than I'd ever seen him. The burden had lifted from his eyes, though grief still lived in the corners. There were bruises that hadn't yet faded, some you could see, most you couldn't. He set his mug down gently on the railing and turned to me. "You saved everything," he said. "Even when I didn't believe you'd forgive me." I smiled faintly. "I almost didn't." He didn't flinch at that, he just nodded. "I shouldn't have disappeared," he said quietly. "Not without saying goodbye, not to you." The wind picked up a little, brushing against my face like a reminder. "You left me in a room full of mourners to grieve someone who wasn't dead," I said. "You let me think I was crazy." His throat bobbed. "I thought staying away would keep you safe, but I made you walk through fire alone." I looked down at my hands. The coffee had gone cold. "I learned something in that fire," I murmured. "That I'm not who she thought I was." "Who was that?" he asked gently. "Silent, blind, easy to control." Dry chuckle. "She always underestimated you. Even when you were little, she'd tell me, 'Claire's just like me, she'll learn to play the game.' But you never played." I looked up at him then, really looked, and I saw a man who had finally stopped running. "You know what's strange?" I said. "I don't even want revenge anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "I want peace," I said, "and maybe purpose." He leaned back in the rocker, eyes scanning the trees. "Then let's build from here, clean, quiet." I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I believed that was possible. 2 years later, I stood on a small stage in Charlotte, behind a plexiglass podium, adjusting the mic as the room settled. Rows of women, men, college students, and retirees, all different walks of life, watched me with quiet anticipation. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The backdrop behind me read, "Reclaiming Trust, Personal Empowerment After Financial Betrayal." It still amazed me that they asked me to speak. "My name," I began, smiling gently, "is Claire Ellison. I'm the founder of ClearPath Consulting, and like many of you here, I didn't choose to become an expert in betrayal. Betrayal chose me." A few people chuckled softly. Others nodded, knowing exactly what I meant. 2 years ago," I continued, "I was arrested for crimes I didn't commit. My mother tried to erase my father's life for money, and I was almost buried along with him, in court filings, headlines, and public shame." A hush fell over the room. I didn't flinch. "But here's the thing no one tells you," I said. "Justice isn't a thunderclap, it's a whisper. A steady decision day after day to stand back up, to speak when you want to hide, to trust yourself again." I paused. "My father now writes in a sunroom filled with morning light and coffee stains. He's retired, peaceful, working on a memoir he says he'll finish when the time feels right." That drew a soft laugh from the back of the room. I smiled. "And me. I help people whose lives were shattered by manipulation, stolen identities, false accusations. Not just the legal stuff, but the human stuff, the shame, the doubt, the loneliness." I scanned the room, faces leaning forward now. "Sometimes," I said, my voice gentler, "the people closest to you are your greatest tests, but they can also be your greatest revelations, because surviving what they did to you doesn't just make you strong, it makes you clear." I took a breath. "Justice isn't revenge. It's reclaiming your voice." Applause broke out, warm and sustained. And as I stepped down from the stage, a young woman near the aisle reached out and touched my arm. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shimmered. "You made me feel less alone." I nodded. "You're not." Later that evening, I called Dad. "How'd it go?" he asked, voice muffled with pen in mouth. "You'll hear about it when your editor calls you again," I teased. "They're still waiting on chapter 14. He groaned. "You're worse than my deadline reminders." "I'm proud of you," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then quietly, "I'm proud of you too, Claire." The stars were already out when I hung up. The air outside was calm, and so was I, not because everything had been fixed, but because, finally, I had stopped letting anyone else write my story. This was the end of the story. I still think about the moment my father chose to fake his death instead of confronting my mother publicly. Was that the right move, or should he have trusted the system from the start? Tell me in the comments what you think. Did he do the right thing, or would you have handled it differently? And if this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe so we can keep having these conversations together.